Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up.
All right, thank you. Now let's, so just to quickly summarize this, Nebuchadnezzar makes a big statue. It's a big statue. And he says, now whenever we play this music, basically we're making a big sound. Whenever you hear this sound, what's everybody supposed to do? Fall down and worship it. Worship, by the way, in this context, the word worship in Hebrew and in Greek literally means fall down in front of, like prostrate yourself in front of something. So when it's saying worship, it's not necessarily meaning everything that we mean when we say worship. Though in this case, what it's trying to say is, yes, prostrate yourself before this golden image in order to show your submission, first of all, to Nebuchadnezzar. It's unclear whether Nebuchadnezzar is setting this up to be some kind of a deity, as an idol in the technical sense of, this represents a god in heaven, and we want you to honor this god. Maybe he does, it's just unclear from the text whether that's what he wants to have happen. Or whether it's a way of saying, bow down to this as a symbol that you honor me above all other things. Either way could be the case, but clearly he is trying to show, I want you to express absolute allegiance to something as the highest thing to express allegiance to, by bowing down before him. This is why as we'll see, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego take issue with this. If all he was saying was, I want you to say, bow down before me as your king, they would have done it. Not because they're honoring him as the highest possible thing, but they interpret this, he's asking us to commit some form of idol worship, that is, honoring something more than God. All right, so verses 8 through, let's go 12.
Astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You have issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up.
All right, so notice they are saying here that they do not follow the various gods. So I guess I should correct myself. Sometimes I forget what's in the text after even I read it, and say this probably actually is an instance where it's not, whether it's specific a god or not, it in some way indicates subservience to the gods of Babylon. So again, I stand corrected of my own immediate previously said thing. All right. So now it's interesting, first of all, that the astrologers bring forward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And why would it be kind of interesting to hear that the astrologers, the wise men, the magicians, the sorcerers of Babylon, are singling out Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as people who are disobeying the law, and therefore should be thrown into a blazing furnace.
They didn't like them.
Well, they didn't like them, which is kind of surprising when you think about it. And why would it be surprising when you think about it? What happened in the previous chapter? Admittedly, this might have been years ago, but what happened in the previous chapter? Who saved the bacon of the astrologers and the wise men? It was Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They saved these guys from execution by the king by interpreting the dream. They would have all been dead. There would have been no more astrologers if it were not for Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel. And now, years later, not only has Nebuchadnezzar forgot all the kindness that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have done, and their God has done, but so apparently have all their peers.
Evidently, there was still a lot of jealousy there.
Right. Any of you who have ever been in a situation where people are vying for status, know that it doesn't matter how much a person has done for you in the past. You might be willing to betray them to get... How many of you watch reality shows like Survivor or know the basic gist of it? Well, the basic gist is, of course, you put these people on this island and they're all supposed to be vying to get $1 million, right? And some of them form very close bonds, right? Does that bond matter once the $1 million is at stake? It does not matter. They will betray, they will lie, they will do all kinds of horrible things to the person they love more than anyone else on that island to get the $1 million. This is unfortunately an aspect of sinful human nature. We can be very grateful to people and still willing to betray them if we think it will sufficiently be in our interests. And these astrologers are more than happy to do that, even if they might have been grateful to them, knowing these three are favored by Nebuchadnezzar above all the others. And Daniel, of course. And so this is an opportunity for them to get higher in the court, and more power, more prestige, and more wealth, and they're going to take it. And who knows, by the way, we don't know that much about the Babylonian gods. We know something about some of them, but understand, your religion does also impact, ideally, how you are willing to behave in this world. Now, let's say, for the sake of the argument, that the Babylonian gods are something like the other gods of other cultures, like the Greek gods, the Roman gods, the Egyptian gods. One thing we know is those gods are always trying to jockey with each other to get the upper hand under the high god, whoever that happens to be. In the Babylonian case, it's Marduk. If you believe that the gods are willing to do all kinds of horrible things to each other in order to get higher status, why would you see it as a problem to do it here below? You wouldn't. However, if you are a Christian and you're actually sincere in it, would you be willing to throw people under the bus in order to get higher status, higher position? Why not?
Because it just goes against everything you...
This is diametrically opposed to what you believe God wants. This is not in line with how the gods behave. This is opposed to your God. Which, by the way, I will assert, there has probably never been a person on Survivor who has claimed to be Christian and won, and done so with a clean conscience. Because however much they want to assert it's a game, it's part of the game, they still had to tell lies, they still had to betray, they still broke commandments and defied their God in order to get the prize. Now, that's not to say they can't be forgiven and they won't repent and they won't be in heaven. It's just to say that's a situation that puts a person in a place where they are asked to violate their conscience. And unfortunately, they will.
Money is the root of all evil.
It's the love of it certainly is the root of all kinds, that's for sure. But, okay, back to the story. Somebody, and by the way, people at Zion, you're free to read too. Just read nice and loud. Verse 13 through 15.
Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall victim and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" How far did you say?
That's right, and that's where we're starting. Okay, so how does Nebuchadnezzar take the news that these three, even though they are among his highest and most trusted advisors, are not doing what he says? How does he take the news? Yeah, he's not happy. He does, at least to his credit, if you want to call it that, give them a chance to prove. He doesn't just say, "Oh, they're talking bad about him, kill him right away." No, he brings them in and he says, "Okay, do what I tell you and you're going to live. If you don't, you burn." And by the way, the last statement is very significant. And what God is going to be able to deliver you. Even if Nebuchadnezzar is setting up this image to honor his gods, notice how he already here betrays his heart. That he believes his power to kill these people is even stronger than his own gods to save them. Because not even the gods of Babylon could possibly save you for what I'm about to do to you. It just goes to show the arrogance that people are capable of, even when they are presumably, in their own statement, acting to honor something higher than themselves. That they betray that I am actually in control. And nothing is going to help you if I set myself against you. And you could take the reverse position. Nothing is going to help me if I can't get the job done. We are so easily, even idolatry, in other words, very often turns out to be a form of self-idolatry. That is to say, one of the greatest temptation to sin is to look at yourself as the source of everything good and everything bad in your life. As Luther put it, be incurved on yourself. Rather than giving your fear and your love and your trust to God, you put your fear and your love and your trust back on yourself as the one who decides what's good, what's bad, as the one who is capable of accomplishing anything worthwhile, or being, so that we lose all hope if I cannot accomplish something I set my heart to. Because what hope could there be if I can't accomplish it? Or if I set my heart to something and accomplish it, well, clearly it is by my great power and not by anything else. It's one of the reasons we so very often are tempted not to turn to God in prayer in every and any circumstance, because at the end of the day, well, what does that show about our hearts? At the very least, there's a part of us that still thinks we are sufficient to the task, and that there's nothing else outside of us that could be sufficient to the task. I do want to, before we move on, just circle back really quickly, because I realize there's a lot of teenagers out at Zion, and point out too something about this idea of stabbing people in the back or acting in a way to get position and favor. This also applies to all kinds of other things in our lives, both at work, both in school, both in sports, where if we're willing to cheat, if we're willing to bend and break the rules in order to accomplish a goal, what are we saying? Well, I am willing to sacrifice my principles. I am willing to sacrifice my conscience before God in order to get this end. And that, of course, is sin. It's idolatry of a very real kind. And the Christian should be unwilling to do it, and if they fall into it, should repent of it and seek for forgiveness. All that being said, let's move on. 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's response to this very real threat. And we already know Nebuchadnezzar is not one to make empty threats. He will do what he says. You have to give it to that guy for that. Somebody want to read verse 16 through 18.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve will be able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Then,
okay, we'll stop there for a minute. All right, so how does Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego reply to this very real threat on their lives? Not going to do it. Just plain not going to do it. And not only are we don't even need to give you a reason we're not going to do it, Nebuchadnezzar. We don't need to defend ourselves. We are not obligated to obey you here, and we're not going to obey you here. And why do they not? What's the reason they give for not willing to obey him? Or verse 18, what do they say? We will not do what?
serve your gods.
Serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. And before they say that, they say, even if you throw us into the furnace, by the way, you are wrong, king, about the fact, about your idea that there is no God able to save us from your hand. Our God is able to. And we fear him, we trust him, we love him more than we fear you, more than we love you, more than we trust your ability to carry out your threats. Now, where did I get that language of we fear you, or fear him, love him, and trust him more than we fear or love or trust you, O King? We should fear, love, and trust in God above what? All things. The explanation of the first commandment, you shall have no other gods. And I do want us to spend a minute to say, when that first commandment, when God gives us this first commandment, yes, obviously is saying, don't bow down to the Babylonian gods. Don't worship the gods of the Canaanites. Don't go to a Muslim mosque and pray with them just to keep them happy with you. Yes, obviously he means that. But it also involves more than just ostensible false gods out there. It also means, and it's primarily about, where do you set your heart? What do you really fear most in this world? Are you more scared of, say, dying than you are of offending the God who has claimed you? If you are worshiping you are fearing losing your life more than you fear God, and you are therefore setting your own life as your God. As Luther puts it in the large catechism, wherever you look to for the source of all good, that is your God. The heart is an idol factory. It is what makes your God. If your fear and your love and trust is in the right place, you have the right God. If your fear, love, and trust is in the wrong place, you have a false God. It doesn't matter whether you call it a God, or whether you call it money, whether you call it success, whether you call it personal happiness, whether you call it your president or the military or the king, it does not matter. That is your God. If that is what you fear more than anything else, if it's what you love more than anything else, if it's what you trust more than anything else. And I'll just circle to a slight tangent, but it's very much related. One of the pieces of advice we are often given today is, above all else, be true to yourself. How many of you have heard something like that? Messaged to every person of every age. If you strip it down to its core, what it's basically telling you to be is trust your heart, your feelings. And usually it's not even your own sense of logic. It's usually saying trust your feelings in the moment more than you trust everything else. I guess ignore all the times your feelings have led you astray. Trust those more than anything else. And even if you want to broaden it out to say trust your own intellect, your own reason, your own forward projection for planning in the future, even if you broaden it out past just your feelings in the moment, trust yourself is often pushed to such an extent that you would even say, second guess God if he tells you something that goes against your heart. Follow where your heart leads. Do what you know is right for you. Which is basically saying, ignore the first commandment. Make you and your heart and your feelings and your own intellect and your own planning the God. And judge the true God by virtue of those things. And if he disagrees with you, fear betraying yourself more than betraying him. Love yourself more than you love him. Trust yourself more than you trust him. It's bad advice from first to last. Practically, because it's usually not good advice in the first. I mean, how often are you wrong? But also theologically, it's about the worst advice you can possibly give someone. Don't follow your heart. Don't trust yourself. Trust in the word of the Lord. And shape your heart accordingly. That being said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego obviously do not fear or love or trust the king more than they love their God. They assert he can save us, but they also acknowledge, notice they don't say he will save us. Say he can. But they also acknowledge he might not. Just because he's our God doesn't mean he's promised that he's going to save us from these circumstances and difficulties. He might let us die. Is that going to cause them to lose confidence in him? No. This is amazing when you think about it. I trust in my God, and I'm going to follow him, even if he's not going to deliver me from this immediate and painful death. And I'm not going to betray him just because he lets me die and suffer. Huh.
What about King Nebuchadnezzar thought of that though? Because, you know, he can, but if he doesn't, I mean.
Oh, what would Nebuchadnezzar hear?
Yeah, they're throwing down into it in Nebuchadnezzar's mind, I would think.
Oh, yeah, no, they're definitely throwing down a gauntlet to Nebuchadnezzar. They're basically challenging all of his authority and his entire theology by saying, I don't have to worry about it. I'm not good. You don't have the authority to command me to do this. And by the way, that's also a good point to say. No governing authority, even if raised up by God himself, has the power and the authority to make you violate your conscience before God. Or as the apostles say when the Sanhedrin tells them to stop preaching the name of Christ, you remember what they say? We must obey God rather than men. And no doubt the Sanhedrin heard that as a challenge. No doubt Nebuchadnezzar hears this, as these people are extremely defiant. They are actively and explicitly ignoring me. And they told me to my face they're going to. So of course Nebuchadnezzar is going to react as you would expect a king who has just been defied to his face by his servants is going to react. He's going to follow through on his threat. But before we move on, I just want to emphasize one last time. Notice the kind of faith and what sort of confidence would have to rely on God and continue to trust him, even if it acknowledges God may not let me see any more good in this life in the next 5 minutes, and I am going to give up my life, if necessary, in order to follow him. Well, as Paul says, if only for this life we have hope in God. Why would you do that? Even if there is a God. If all there is the life in this world, and that's all that God is going to give you, then if following him is going to terminate life in this world, why would you keep following that God? The benefit the cost outweighs the benefit at that point. Clearly, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego think there are, first of all, more important things than the mere act of living. And that takes something. But also, they probably embody the same faith and the hope that Abraham had when, as he died, what happened? Do you know what the scripture says? He was gathered to his people. That is to say, they almost certainly have hope and certainty that there is more than this life. Not only are there higher things than living, there is more than this life. And so your loyalty will go to God, who you know will continue to be the God of the living and not the dead, as Jesus would say. And therefore, even if you die, yet you will live as you cling to this God. All right, 19 through 23.
Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude towards them changed. He ordered a furnace heated 7 times hotter than the usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, shoes, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace.
All right. Short story, he was real mad, and he did it. But we won't spend any more time except to say, why do you think it makes all this pain to talk about how they're still wearing all this clothes when they get thrown in?
Because when they come out, there's no sin.
Right. It sets us up for what happens at the end. And it emphasizes the point, there's no way they should be getting out of this alive. It kills the people who are throwing them in, and they're fully clothed. And clothes are very flammable things, especially back in the day before you had polyvinyl blends. All right, 24 through 25.
And King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that were tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, O king." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like the son of the gods."
All right, so what happens? Nebuchadnezzar, we know what he's expecting. What would anybody expect? These guys are going to be marshmallows by the end of this, and not ones you'd even want to eat. But what does he see? Yeah, not just, first of all, they're walking around in the fire, which is very unusual behavior. If you, I mean, I've never been in the fire, but I assume you're not in walking mood or taking a stroll. Unharmed, unbound. That is, the things tying them up are destroyed, but the rest of them seems fine. And the big one, how many people does he see? 4. And what's that 4th one like? A son of the gods, or as if he were a Jew, he probably would have, or a Christian, said, looks like the Son of God. Now there are some Christians think that what happened was God sent an angel there. Some Christians will say this was probably the angel of the Lord, that is to say, the pre-incarnate Christ, the Son of the living God, in the fire already with them. You can take it either way, I suppose. It's not like that we are bound one way or the other. I personally favor the interpretation that this is the Son of God himself there guarding and shielding them, who goes into the fire in order to spare them from the fire, much like the Son of God comes down and goes into the death in order to spare us from death. But I'm not going to pick any fights with people about it either. Point being, God does act. He does save them. And Nebuchadnezzar, before his very eyes, is shown how utterly wrong he has been. And by the way, I will give this also to Nebuchadnezzar. Have you ever met a person who's confronted with an obvious point that they are wrong, and they still persist? It's very common, strangely enough, that there is no denying that they are wrong, and they'll still, I'm doubling down even though I'm wrong. Nebuchadnezzar is not that kind of person, which is probably one of the reasons he was such a good king, all things being equal. He sees his error and he changes 180 degrees. Somebody want to read 26 through, we'll go all the way down to the end of the chapter here to 30.
Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was the hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants." They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God.
All the way to the end. Go ahead.
Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the office of that.
All right, so like I said, things take a drastic 180 degrees here. Notice, we'll just pick a few phrases very briefly of what Nebuchadnezzar says, and we won't belabor these points just because we're almost out of time. We might come back next week and start off with some application for our lives just because we won't have quite the time to do it. But notice when he goes and he calls them out, he calls them right away servants of which God? The Most High God. Already, as soon as Nebuchadnezzar sees this, he says, this is unlike any other act of any other God I have ever experienced or heard of. Clearly, their God Again, he's not denying there are other gods. He's not fully converted to Judaism at this point, but he does think this God is stronger than every other god. He is the highest of the gods.
But I thought he did that before when Daniel interpreted his dream the first time.
He did.
And he said, you're God, and then he converted there, I thought.
Well, notice we didn't say he necessarily converted wholesale to their religion, but he did at that point already acknowledge yours is the highest.
Yeah.
And again, this goes back to what we were starting with, that just because a person comes to believe something to be true at one point doesn't mean as time goes on, things happen in their lives, that they don't have that confidence eroded and sometimes disappear entirely. It's also possible that he was just swept up in the moment at that first time and just expressing things that on consideration he wouldn't actually believe, but in the moment he was just really impressed and going over the top with it. In either case, whether it was a genuine or whether an over-the-top moment, his perspective for whatever reason has obviously changed however long after this. And again, this could have been months, it could have been years, we don't know. Nebuchadnezzar reigned 40-some years, a very long time. And you can imagine how circumstances change a person over a period of time. So, yes, but that doesn't mean he didn't need to be reminded, so to speak. And here he is, a very big reminder. And notice, everybody sees this. It's not just the king. It's all of the royal crowd, so to speak, who sees this. And after this, he says some very interesting things. And I have to imagine everybody was kind of amazed that Nebuchadnezzar, king, was saying this. He praises the god, yes, which makes sense. Nebuchadnezzar interprets this as an angel being sent, by the way. That doesn't mean that Nebuchadnezzar is right and that it's an angel. It's just to say this is Nebuchadnezzar's perspective on the matter. But then he says, he's praising them because they trusted in him and defied me. I'm so glad you did that. Thank God you defied me. Which goes to say, Nebuchadnezzar is at least capable of being humbled. Which is not a bad. I'm not saying be like Nebuchadnezzar. I'm just saying it's remarkable when you think of all the other figures in history and in the Bible who would not say something like that. And then he passes on even to make a law. Therefore I decree is a shorthand way of saying I am making it a law of the land that basically Judaism is now protected. It's not to say we are going to officially become Jewish, but we are going to protect the Jews and their religion. Nobody is allowed to speak against their God. And anybody who does is going to be punished with the full force of the law.
Well, how about all of this that said that right before they put him in the furnace?
Well, I don't think it's retroactive.
Oh, it's not retroactive.
Well, I imagine that Nebuchadnezzar was realizing, I am one of those who said that before.
Yeah.
He allows room for the fact that, okay, new things have happened, and now everybody should acknowledge this fact.
Going forward.
Right. And notice, like we said at the very beginning, how God uses these four figures who were abducted from Jerusalem, who I'm sure everyone in Jerusalem at the time was weeping and saying, oh, how terrible for them that they're taken from our homeland. This is before most others were. And put through all of these rigorous training and things, not the life they would have chosen for themselves. And I imagine everyone in Jerusalem and Judah was thinking, what a horrible fate to befall them. Notice how just like Joseph again was sold into slavery in Egypt, imprisoned for many years, not a fate anyone, and certainly Joseph wouldn't have wanted for himself, how at the end of it, as God worked through Joseph to protect the people of Israel, make them come there, not only feed them, but give them a favored status for a long time. So likewise, as the Jews come to Babylon, they are allowed to worship their God in relative peace, to maintain the identity the Babylonians otherwise had exported them for the very purpose of destroying them. And so God works through these people to influence the king in order to make conditions favorable so that a righteous remnant of his people can endure and return home. It's pretty amazing how God works.
I have a question. They were firmly tied when they went in. I don't think they were going to let him out.
They were unbound and sent him out.
But yeah, no, remember while they were in the fire, it said they were walking around unbound. So miraculously, maybe God caused the fire to burn their ropes and not their clothes. Maybe it just fell away like the chains did in the prison with Peter. I don't know exactly how or when the bonds fell away. They just obviously became unbound when they came out.
Maybe the fourth person showed up unbound.
Well, right, exactly. It doesn't go into detail about that. It just says that they were unbound while they're in there. And no doubt God, if he's capable of keeping them from being singed, is capable of also changing the circumstances of their capture. This is one thing people often will bring up things about, well, how could that happen? You have to remember, we have the God who called the universe into being with a word. I think he's capable of bending and breaking the laws that he called forth with a word whenever he wants. Now I'm going to say one last little, possibly controversial thing just before I have to leave, and I do have to leave. I wonder, I don't say this as an assertion you need to take to heart. I wonder if one of the key reasons God established something like a First Amendment in this country was not to give us some great liberal democracy in the world where everybody is free to believe what they want to believe without fear, but rather so that, like in Babylon, the church would have the space to more freely and openly live under their God and proclaim the gospel. That perhaps God's purposes were not and are not what we have often made them to be, which is, let's respect everybody and never even give the impression that we would want to make them Christian, but so that we can be Christian fully and authentically, unbridled by the fear of enemies who want to destroy us, and make more people aware of the glory of God, just as he did in Egypt, just as he did in Babylon, just as he did in Rome, just as he did just knock the empires off your list. Who knows? I'm not saying you have to believe that. I'm just saying, keep for thought. Let's close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. All righty. Thank you, God.